This is IsAware, powered by Intersoft Associates. IsAware is your connection to exploring the systems and software that power businesses like yours with expert insight, experience, and advice.
Welcome back to IsAware. I'm Chris Bentliff, and I'm joined for the first time today by Abe Unger and Hy Goldstoff. And guys, we had this interesting conversation previously about business intelligence and how that is fed with data mining, accumulating, aggregating this data, which leads into, I think, a discussion around big data. And we've talked about that a little bit before, but how do I start to think about big data as right data? Because I think that there's a sense of overwhelm that kind of plagues the idea of how do I put big data to use for me? And for that matter, just data. What should I be capturing? What is important? What isn't important, but I'm capturing it and it could just be sort of noise overwhelming the signal. So Abe, let me kind of start with you from that kind of technical perspective. How do I start to think about the right data that I need in order to satisfy some business imperatives or objectives that I'm trying to achieve?
All right, so let's start with don't fear your data. Gather as much data as you can, whether you think you're going to need it or not. There's really very little downside to gathering more information that you think is actually necessary, because having the data is really not something that's problematic in terms of cost or space, but it will be worthwhile once you start using it. Once you have all of that data, you then need to figure out, well, what can it do for me? Having the data sitting there is great, and it's wonderful, and your IT people and your backup specialists are all going to be thrilled that you have all that data. But now you got to make it useful. And that's where a consultant or someone to talk to comes in, where they can help you talk about what it is that you're looking for. What do you want to accomplish with this data? What is it doing for you? What can it do for you? And what haven't you thought about that it can do for you? And those are the kinds of things that you want to talk to someone about. And like I said, it can sound overwhelming, and you're talking about, big data. These are concepts or things that you hear that can get you a little bit nervous. And what does that mean? And what is that? Maybe my data is not big enough. It's not really the size of the data. It's really how do we use that data and make it work for you? And that's really what you want to get out of this process.
I really think there are two parts to this. There's one way where you have an hypothesis where something is not going the way I think it should be going. And you might want to analyze what it is. You're not getting goods on time, supply chain, which is certainly a big problem nowadays. And do whatever the proper analysis may be of that information, going back to your supplier, especially if they're abroad. Look at those things where you think things are not right. And then start looking at what data you need to analyze it, to come up with a reason why. What is the cog? What is the block in the process? So that's one way to do it, and you have to start with an hypothesis, and ultimately, as you drill down, you learn other things. The problem may not be here. The problem may not be in the ports. The problem may be at my supplier. Are there other suppliers? And what data is available over there? So that's one approach. The other approach is just to be somewhat proactive and saying what data, that may or may not be actionable in the future, I may not need it today. But once you start, accumulating data historically, you can start seeing trends, which will open your eyes. And so the real, or which can open your eyes. So the other track over here, as Abe was saying, would be to say, what are the data points that we need? Be it customer behavior, be it market behavior, be it shipments, be it velocity of our inventory, so many different areas. And how can we drill down even further? We certainly know when something comes in and when we sell it, but what are the other points? When people pay, how do you, get them to pay more quickly? What tactics can be used to help people pay more quickly? Items like that. And there's one that we did We had mentioned it in a prior broadcast or podcast. Is the what we did with the Department of Education for Pearson Education, the New York City Board of Education. Rather, is they wouldn't pay on an invoice until they had proof of delivery. Well, that's a huge problem. It's a huge problem with data, and ultimately, without going through all the processes, we realized that there was a data available to us that we can store as a data warehouse where we go and poll the various shippers to get that proof of information, package it for the Board of Education to show that the items were delivered, and allow them, however we packaged it for them, say, okay, this stuff is here, come pay, and make it easier for them to do it. Make it easier for them to use that same data, so they can go into their own payment systems to get Pearson paid. And we reduced day sale outstanding, dramatically over there, through a fairly simple use of data, just knowing that the data is there and we can get it. And once we did that, we see the trend, and we were able to adapt that to other clients, that paid slow. So it had a huge impact on their cash flow, and but the two parts are, you have an hypothesis, develop that with the data, figure out what data is needed, to confirm or whatever, and then the other one is just get as much data as you can. Wherever it might be. Once you start storing it historically, you can see trends, and that's using the right tools. It's companies like us that can determine what the right tools are for each particular job. Unfortunately, there are software firms out there who know how to do things one way, and there's one tool. If to them, everything is a nail because they only know how to use a hammer.
So let reverse engineer some of this a little bit for me. Abe, when Pearson came, did they say, look, here's the problem we're having, and we don't have any idea how to solve it? And then you guys got into investigation mode and understood the data they were using and said, okay, well, understanding all the things you're doing, here's a way? Or did they come and say, here's all the data we have, and here's a problem. Can you guys help us figure out how to solve it? Is there a conventional or typical way that companies come in with these issues, and that helps you to sort of understand from your perspective, oh, so here's an approach to solutions?
All right, so I'll answer the second question first. No, there's no typical way, because you're right, it could be different. There could be companies that have a specific problem that they're looking to solve and others that don't. In the case of Pearson specifically, they knew they had the problem. They didn't have the data. They knew they had the problem. They needed to figure out how they can solve the problem. And part of the problem is that the data that they needed is not data that's available all the time in the feeding systems. That data after 30 or 60 days is discarded. So you can't get that data digitally anymore at that point. You have to start making paper requests and all that kind of stuff. So the concept was, how can we gather enough data so that we have all of the information for them? And as part of that process, we were looking specifically at the Department of Education and doing that, getting the data for them. But as part of the process was built to get any data that was shipped, regardless of who the destination was, so that we have that data for other clients as well, even though it may not be needed, because the task at hand was, okay, Department of Ed, how do we fix this? And our solution was, let's get this data for everybody. Now, in the future, when you have someone else who comes to complain about something and says, oh, I don't want to pay this invoice because you don't have the proof of delivery, we can go back and say, yes, we do. And we have that on file because we gathered that data long in advance of ever actually needing it for anyone else. So it was geared at their problem, but the solution was a solution that solves future problems that they didn't think they had yet. So that's the idea behind it. Now, there are many clients who they may come to us with a problem, and they, like you said, they may say, oh, here, I have all of this data. What do I do with it? How do I make decisions coming out of that? How do I get that data in a format I can understand? And that's another kind of conversation, because that's where you actually have information, but is it correct? Is it complete? What are you missing? And then from there, what can be done with it? So it's different approaches. So there's no typical, but that's the magic of data and business intelligence. Is it's not typical. It's taking that information and making something useful out of it. And that's going to be different. As I said, for every client, there's different tools that are going to be more applicable to the specific situation or specific problem that you may be looking at. Whereas if you're looking at the same tool for everything, it may not actually do what you want. But if you know what the right tools are, you get that information. It could be very, very important in terms of what solution you want to use. But that way you have, your Swiss Army knife. You go in there and take whatever tool is appropriate for the job, not just the blunt object.
Interesting.
What we did also, I mean, is it goes back to to listening. Is we solved the problem for the Board of Education, but then we said, then ultimately what we did just by asking more questions. The hard part was getting the data. That was the a challenge. But then we built software integrated with their collections process, so that if they called somebody up or a client calls them up and I never got proof of delivery, they can say, okay, they can find out what their PO was, what their invoice was, the shipment, and immediately go in there and email them a copy of their proof of delivery immediately. And that just became fairly a couple of lines ago. No, a couple of button clicks that they could do that. So that accelerated that payment, where the person on the other end of the phone, on the Pearson end of the phone, doesn't have to make a request with FedEx or UPS or whomever the carrier might have been. We have the data. They can send a PDF with all that information, and they've got it, and they can't question it anymore. And that also accelerated payments, not to the extent that the BOE did, but it was easy. It saved that collection person a whole bunch of time. That allowed them to go and contact more people who owed them money. So it was a win-win-win.
One of the things that you're sharing that I think is interesting is this idea of the tools, and I'm thoughtful about some of the things that you've shared. Do I need a data scientist on my team to make sense of it? How do I recognize these trends? How do I do this stuff with it? And part of what I hear you saying, Hai, is with the right custom solution, it can be integrated into tools you're already using. It can be a couple clicks away. It's not an intimidating, overwhelming process. It's at your fingertips in ways that are already natural to you. Is that accurate?
Yeah. It goes back to the most granular part, is get the data. No matter what software you're using, so many pieces of software certainly have great analytics, but the problem is as you start bringing in other data items that are not part of your ERP, but are tangentially related somehow, is get those in, and you can actually build that analytic tool by combining the information in your ERP and this outside information into kind of a data warehouse, be it real time or actually have one where you can do that analytic. We can do that. So you're not limited by whatever your ERP might be. Certainly, if you build something custom, you're in a lot more control of what you have. But if you've got an ERP, you're going to be limited, or making a lot of these changes can be, exorbitantly expensive. So, there are a lot of ways to do it, but, understand the problem, understand the possibilities, and identify what data you think you'll need, and then find those that might be related, because you never know when you're going to need them. And trending is a really, really important part, and especially as you see changes in trending, what the trends might have been 2 years ago and what the trends are today, and potentially make sense out of that. Why is that happening?
And it's not that you need someone necessarily on staff who's going to do that for you. You don't need a data scientist on staff to do that. You need someone to talk to who understands data. And that could be a data scientist, that could be at a firm like ours or anywhere else, but that could be someone else you're dealing with. So it's not that you need staff to do this. You really need to understand your business. And that's where, help can be given to you from us or where you can go through and understand that. So you can actually talk to someone there and they can help you with that. So you don't necessarily need a data scientist to understand this. You just really want to understand your own business and what you can do with it. Let the team figure out how to dive into that data and get what you need.
It's the value of that consultation that we've talked about before, somebody who can be your strategic complement, because as you said earlier, what you're good at, when you can merge it with what an organization like Intersoft is good at, that's that 1 and 1 equals 3 kind of sensibility. This was a really interesting conversation, guys, and I could ask more about it, so we might come back to this another time to talk a little bit more about some of these tools and processes and ways to study and analyze this data. But thanks for this kind of deep dive into the right data. Don't fear your data. And I love how you broke it down into, look, you can either be diagnostic, you're looking for something, or collect the data and figure out what to do with it. Those are good perspectives. Appreciate your expertise today, guys. We'll talk to you next time.
Look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for IsAware, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one today. IsAware is powered by Intersoft Associates, who believes the more you know about your IT, the better. Visit us at intersoftassociates.com and schedule your free consultation to talk about how custom software can help your business.